Hey guys, I'm Jake, one of your high school life group leaders. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell below. You can find us on all social media platforms including Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Now, check out this funny video I found.
Bankrupt, no money on my card.
Wasn't that a funny video? If you thought so, let us know in the comments below. If you haven't been keeping up with our worship, you can check it out in the description below. And now to this week's sermon.
I grew up with this girl from church. We were best friends in elementary school, best friends in middle school and high school. But once we reached high school, she started to pull away a little bit. And I was really hurting because I didn't want to lose her friendships after being friends our entire life. But when I was finally being able to let into what was going on in her life, I found out she was dealing with suicidal thoughts. She was dealing with depression and anxiety. And she just didn't understand how a Christian could be dealing with all these mental health issues. I'm so happy we're talking about this right now because I wish I had these tools during that time, that being Christian and being in therapy is okay, that being Christian and taking medication is okay, because that was something that we didn't think about at that time. Because that girl is me, and I've been officially diagnosed with severe depression and general anxiety disorder.
Jacqueline Hernandez. I'm an LPC and I have experience as a former school counselor and work in private practice working with adolescents and adults.
My name is Brooke Gilliland. I'm a licensed professional counselor associate, still under the supervision of Dr. Christina Davis. I see kids and teens and I work in a private practice.
My name is Andrea Powell Davis and I have worked in the mental health or education arena since 1991. That's when I got my bachelor's degree. And I've had the honor of working in the military as an Army reservist for 8 years, civilian side, pretty much the continuum of the mental health arena, inpatient and outpatient in the schools and out. And I'm just so honored to be here because this is what we're supposed to be talking about, mental health. God is in our mental health.
So let's start here, anxiety. Tell us a little bit about what a teenager should be looking for to let them know that they're experiencing anxiety.
First, I want to just kind of point out that the words anxiety, depression, it can be confusing because we talk about it in our daily lives. And the difference between a clinical depression and clinical anxiety versus just anxious feelings, it's really a set of descriptors or symptoms that a professional will look at, and we won't necessarily list those off because you don't have to take that on to try and diagnose yourself. That's actually not a good idea. But I want to point out the difference between our everyday words and the clinical side is mainly how much it affects our lives and how severe it is, how problematic it is. And I just wanted to mention also that feelings in general, feeling anxious, feeling depressed, none of those are sins. And I like to refer to them as like they're like balloons just kind of floating up and just telling us a status. And to compare that to texting, you know, we state our status with emojis now. Well, our feelings, those little balloons, those are the original status or original emoji. It just is saying this is what you're feeling right now. You can take it or leave it. Our behaviors and our thoughts have a lot of impact on our feelings. So we can change the feeling by our behaviors and thoughts. And so when we talk about the clinical side of it, that's what counselors and professionals help you do, is identify what the problem area is and how to to try and get those to change.
And being anxious, that can be something, like you're saying, that can be a normal feeling. So we have good anxiety and bad anxiety.
Yeah.
So good anxiety is there's a car coming and you know to get out of the way because you feel a sense of fear. So that would be considered good anxiety. But bad anxiety can look like lots of worries that you can't stop. So the idea of your heart's pounding and you can't quit thinking about things, like Miss Andrea is saying, things that become so distracting in your normal life that you might find yourself laying on your bed looking at TikTok or Instagram, trying to kind of block those things out. At that point, that's something that would be, bad anxiety that you might want to get help with.
Especially if you're not doing the homework that you planned on doing.
Right. Or you're having stomach aches all the time and headaches and you just don't feel good because it can become a physical symptom when it's overwhelming you. Yeah.
So what are the signs that students should be aware of when they're walking through a season of depression?
Some of the warning signs involve a loss of interest in things that normally were fun for students. It can look like disturbances in their sleep patterns or eating patterns. It can look like self-isolation, where you really just don't want to be around anybody. It can also include a really heavy sense of hopelessness. Even on the extreme side of questioning your existence and wondering what's the point of living. And I think that it's important to distinguish questioning one's life or the purpose of one's life versus actually having a plan of wanting to end one's life. But certainly when someone is walking in a state of despair and depression, one tends to question their life purpose and what has meaning in their life. So that's unfortunately something that is very pervasive in our community today, not just among teens, but among our entire community. Something for us to really pay attention to. Yeah.
Jackie, as you said that, I thought of how depression sometimes is identified as anger turned inward, but also that anger can look like, depression looks like anger.
Absolutely.
Especially with adolescents, and sometimes they say it's more prevalent with boys, that they're very, very, very angry, and the anger doesn't seem to have a connection. It's sometimes important to get checked out because it might be depression that's going on, so that's important. And also that definition or that description of how depression, if it was a long hallway, that when we have a healthy brain, we can see all of the different doors in the hallway to make decisions to solve our problems. But when the biochemical wash in our brain gets messed up, the doors on the hallway close, and we just don't see the solutions anymore. They're still there, but we don't see them. And so the depressed person, that's why hopelessness is so severe, is because they just don't see the solutions anymore.
And everything seems to be going wrong.
Yes.
Nothing is going right in their
Yes.
lives.
And eventually the only solution when they're very severe is they feel like committing suicide.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Family can be a mix of emotions. When things are going great at home, you kind of feel like you can conquer the world. Tell us about some hard to deal with family relationships. What are some signs of healthy and unhealthy family relationships? And how can we work on them? How can we better equip our moms and dads to be better parents for teenagers?
Okay, that's a lot to put in one question, but a key thing to remember is that healthy versus unhealthy has to take into account everything about the family, personalities, culture, all of that. But there are some themes that are obvious. In healthy families, you see that everyone is able to communicate and feel like they can communicate themselves. Doesn't mean everyone agrees, but everyone can communicate themselves, their feelings, their thoughts. Everyone feels safe. We know when you have people feeling unsafe, all of us know that's not a healthy situation. Another thing is this word vulnerability. We touched on it before, but vulnerability is when you feel safe enough to share something that you feel like could hurt you. So you're vulnerable. And when we feel safe enough, healthy people are vulnerable with trusting people. And as parents, it's important for us to realize we've got to role model that. So first of all, we've got to make sure we're healthy and that we're being vulnerable with trusting people. We also know that in healthy families, parents take care of adult issues with each other, and they don't drag children into that and make the child become part of that conversation. You know, you choose between these things, those kind of things. Children are children, parents are parents, and that's a good litmus test. And sometimes I've had parents say, you want me to be vulnerable, but you also say, and it's hard. So I remind them, being vulnerable is admitting that you can be wrong and allowing for that in the conversation and family. But you're still the adult. You have to make the final call on things. And you've got to pay the bills. You've got to take care of things. And if you've got to communicate to the other adults about the family. And you communicate with adults within the family, mom and dad. So those are some things.
I think also it's important for parents to acknowledge that they don't know. They don't have all the answers. In that moment, there's a tendency to perhaps overreact to certain things simply because they don't know how else to react to a situation. And I think it's important for students to hear from their parents that they don't know what to do in that moment, that they're not sure how to handle that. I mean, I think we've mentioned this in the past, that parents don't leave the hospital with a parenting manual. So
that would be so nice.
So no, and so we don't have all the answers, but it's okay to let your child know, right now, mommy doesn't know what to do, but I love you so much, and we're gonna figure it out.
And with that communication comes all the emotions that God made and that mix within the home. We call it emotional regulation, when everyone's, on a level up to here because everyone's upset about something. Being able to say, okay, we're going to take a minute, and listening.
I think it's important to know that anger can actually be so many other emotions, but it looks like anger. Confusion can look like anger. Disappointment can look like anger. Exhaustion can look like anger. Uncertainty can look like anger, whether it's coming from your child or from the parent. And so it's important to communicate and identify. It's okay for a parent to say, you know what, Mita, I'm scared right now. I don't know what to do in this moment. But that opens the door. Somehow I think that if parents can take one thing, and that's, it's okay to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability is actually going to open doors of communication, and it's going to provide a connection that can last a lifetime.
Yes.
So what you do in those moments will make or break your relationship.
Yes.
One thing that comes to mind about healthy versus unhealthy is how we perceive the family environment. And I think that parents in general don't think that they're harming their children in how they behave with their children. But if I'm recalling a particular checklist, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Checklist. It's 10 questions. And if it would be interesting to see how many of us as adults, if we were to answer those 10 questions as to how we perceived our childhood, from childhood to 18, in terms of, did we feel that our thoughts and ideas mattered? Were we ever insulted when in the family? Were we pushed around? And you talk about culture, right? And in some cultures,
that's common.
people get pushed around.
Yeah.
But yet, to a child, that might, in a child's mind, that may not seem okay because there's a violation of their space, of their body, of their person. If they're mocked in front of their friends, that may not be funny to them.
Yeah.
It may be hurtful. And so the parent doesn't realize that they are embarrassing their child, but rather the child in that moment may not want to bring their friends over for fear that they're going to get ridiculed.
Yeah.
So it's not that they're hiding or that they're ashamed of the parents necessarily, or that they're around bad company. It may be that they just don't want to be ridiculed.
And that may go back to what we call emotional regulation. So the idea of when those moments are happening, going back to that feeling safe, is our parents screaming, don't yell, when they're getting upset. That idea of sometimes that matching is going on, and kind of bringing those
Matching the high emotion of the person, you match it.
Exactly.
So describe what do people do to fix that?
That's a great question.
de-escalate
So
that.
so I think we were talking about earlier the idea of listening. So just stopping that moment and saying, okay, we are all way up here. We're all at a 10 and we need to come back down to a 5. So we're going to take a cool off moment. We're going to listen. And as parents,
It's tough to do sometimes,
it's
but
hard. Yeah.
but it's a good technique.
Yeah. And sometimes when we get in that mode, we want to ask questions, and we just need to stop and listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes an elevated voice or a confused attitude might come across as anger.
Or disrespectful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think it's important for both parents and students, teenagers, to listen for what's really happening, because many times if parents don't have all the information, they might sound angry or distrusting, but they don't have all the information, right? And with parents, if your student is raising their voice, well, maybe they're hungry, or maybe they're tired, or maybe they've had a bad day at school. And so the student yelling shouldn't merit you yelling back. It should be, let's go have an ice cream and just talk about your day.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Dilly bar.
But it's so powerful, and to see that being able to be genuine in that moment and say, you know what, I think
Yes.
I'm hungry. I think I'm grumpy.
I think I said
Right now.
something I didn't mean right now, and
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That can be
Yes.
really hard, especially what background we come from. It can be hard to say that, but that can solve so many problems, and it can keep us away from unhealthy areas.
Let's talk about identity. During the teenage years, so many young people are struggling with identity issues. This includes, but it's not limited to, students asking questions about their sexuality. Talk to us about that. How can we as parents help students walk through these things? How can teenagers help their friends? What are some things we should know?
We know that our identity comes from Christ, but
Right. So sometimes that sexuality question can come up, I think, because people are trying to figure out who they are.
Yes.
It's like we're saying, it's a natural time God made human development the way it is.
Yeah.
So these are the years you may have so many questions and feel like you have the pressure on you to figure them all out right now.
I think for parents, the most important thing you can do is demonstrate, communicate, and visibly show your unconditional love to your child. Those questions are very normal, and chances are parents have had those identity questions. And so I think that as opposed to reacting in the moment to the shock or whatever the emotion is in that moment, it would be to take it back, serve as an active listener, and not necessarily judge or react with emotion that could potentially hurt the rest of the conversation and the rest of that relationship. So it's okay, as we've talked about vulnerability, it's okay for parents to tell their kiddos, I don't know how to respond right now, but I love you. And we'll get through this together. We don't have to figure it all out today, but I love you more than anything in this world, and there isn't anything you can do or say that's going to make me stop loving you.
Yeah. And the idea that God's big enough for any questions at all.
That's huge. Even as parents, God's big enough for our questions too.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as how do you talk to your friends about that, I think it's the same concept. Reassure your friends that you're still their friend, no matter what questions or thoughts they're having about that, and that what they're going through in that moment, it doesn't serve to alter your image of them. You know, we've got to remember we're all created in God's image, and even though we don't know what that image is, sometimes we don't know who we are. And we will go through periods in our lifetime where we will question our identity, sexual or not. We will question, if teenagers are questioning that right now, it may be that in a few years they're questioning what they're going to do for the rest of their life, because all of a sudden they're going to graduate next year. That is a universal question, I believe, that will happen many times during one's lifetime. And it's important not to rely on labels, because labels can be very damaging to us.
And they can be very cultural and changing too.
Absolutely. And so we don't have to have it all figured out. Some things are going to be confusing, but if we give ourselves room and time and knowledge, and like Andrea said before, take your faith into that situation.
Take it into the fight. Yes, because, you know, I remember being that age and seeing some others go through that, and so many times if we feel like that's it, my faith, people of faith, church, whatever, my own faith can't handle what I'm dealing with, then we leave our faith here and we go and we jump in, and faith isn't anywhere around us, and we feel like we have to leave God behind. But all through the Bible, it talks about how many people struggled with their faith, struggled with it, and literally fought with angels sometimes, you know. But take your faith with you, whether it's sexuality, whether it's other identity issues. And parents, we have to take our faith with us through all of this. And sometimes we'll have to stand and defend where we stand against other family members or whatever. But the number one commandment is to love. I love your answer on that, because if we love, we're not going to regret loving.
And I was thinking, I want the students to be reminded God loves you, and He's with you all of the time, no matter how many questions you have. It doesn't change His love for you. Yeah, He loves you, and no matter what questions you have, no matter where you are, no matter who you feel like maybe isn't listening, He is always listening, and He hears you where you are.
That was such a great sermon. Now, don't forget to check out our worship playlist, and we'll see you next weekend. Later.